Ivy swooned and Finn discovered she had a brain tumor. The day had started like any other at Forrester Creations, with the soft hum of sewing machines and the faint scent of lately brewed coffee drifting through the halls, yet an unsettling pressure hung in the air, nearly as if the structure itself could smell the storm about to hit. Ivy had been surprisingly quiet during the morning briefing, her generally foamy eyes bedimmed and her confident stride replaced by a conditional equivocation. Commodity Finn incontinently noticed as he entered the design room, where she was sitting slightly hunkered over at her office, gaping blankly at a sketch of a gown she had been working on for hours, her fritters tapping nervously against the table in a meter that was nearly inappreciable, but to Finn, whose suspicion about the people he watched for was uncanny, it screamed, "Commodity is wrong." He approached her gently, his voice soft yet firm. "Ivy, you okay?" And she gave him a weak smile that didn't reach her eyes, trying to brush it off with a light laugh. "I'm okay, Finn, just tired, that's all." But the earthquake in her hands betrayed her words, and before he could respond, her knees buckled, her body folding onto the bottom in an unforeseen, intimidating collapse, the room erupting in gasps as her co-workers rushed forward in fear, calling her name and frenetically trying to help, while Finn's medical training demurred in incontinently. His hands steady as he checked her palpitation, breathing and responsiveness, his mind contending through possibilities, from an unforeseen drop in blood pressure to a further minatory underpinning condition, and as he lifted her gently onto a president, noticing her reddishness and the slight confusion in her eyes, a cold dread settled in his casket. He claimed on getting her to the sanitarium incontinently, navigating the busy corridors of Forrester Creations with rehearsed urgency. Ivy, adhering weakly to his arm, brooding justifications and murmurs of embarrassment, unfit to comprehend the graveness of the situation herself, until Finn's calm but serious address silenced her demurs, his eyes meeting hers with a fierce intensity. "Ivy, you need me to help you right now. Trust me." And she jounced, a fragile rendition in her expression, the weight of query pressing down on both of them. At the sanitarium, the exigency room was a blur of nursers, machines and sterile lights, Finn relaying her symptoms with perfection, yet each word sounded to echo ominously in the clinical space, and as the neurologist began running tests, and creepy silence took over the room, broken only by the metrical beeping of the observers, until Finn was summoned to a private discussion room where the words hit him like a freight train. A mass had been discovered in Ivy's brain, a excrescence of significant concern, the details grim yet cautiously hopeful depending on surgery and treatment. Finn's heart sank, not only because of the medical counter-accusations but because he'd come to watch for Ivy in a way that was beyond professional duty. He had seen her humor, her courage, her vulnerability, the way she lit up a room, and the study of her facing Commodity so shocking alone was unsupportable, and as he returned to her side, Ivy's eyes widened at the solemn look on his face, the usual sportful badinage replaced by raw fear, and Finn took her hand in his, squeezing it gently but with unvarying determination. "Ivy, you have a excrescence," he said vocally, his voice steady despite the storm of feelings hanging to overwhelm him, watching her response as the words sank in, her face paling, a blend of shock, unbelief and rising fear, submerging her features, and yet, beneath that, there was a flicker of trust, of stopgap anchored in Finn's presence, as he continued, explaining the coming way, the treatment options, and most importantly, that she wouldn't face it alone, that every surgery, every appointment, every moment of query, he'd be by her side, a loyal anchor in the turbulent ocean of fear and medical slang. And Ivy, gripping his hand with surprising strength despite her frailty, managed a small, pulsing smile, a silent oath that she'd fight, and together they sat, two hearts bound by trust and an implied understanding, bracing for the battle ahead, while the world outside the sanitarium window continued in unconscious stir. The dramatic pressure of life, love and fragile mortality oil every moment with the intensity that only daytime drama could truly capture. The sanitarium waiting room was tense, nearly suffocating in its silence, broken only by the soft murmur of nursers and the distant beeping of machines from the ER. As Finn paced back and forth, his mind contending with a storm of studies about Ivy, about how fragile life could be and how a single moment could change everything, his hands running through his hair in frustration and solicitude, and yet, despite the chaos inside him, he maintained an air of calm for Ivy, knowing that if she tasted indeed the lowest crack in his countenance, her own fear would multiply tenfold. Moments before, he'd held her hand, watched her pale face as she reused the words brain excrescence, and had promised her that she'd not face this fight alone, that together they would navigate every test, every discussion, and every surgery if it came to that. Yet indeed as he comforted her, he could feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on him, the query eating at his medical training and at his heart likewise, for Ivy was further than a case. She was someone he'd come to deeply watch for, someone whose horse laugh had come a adder in his ill-structured life, whose courage had inspired him, and whose presence he now stressed he might not be suitable to cover. Across the room Steffi had arrived, her expression a admixture of solicitude and controlled countenance, her developer instincts replaced by raw emotion as she gripped a coffee mug for comfort, watching Finn with that piercing aspect that only someone who had been through innumerous sanitarium heads could muster, quietly offering support yet bracing for the possibility of ruinous news, while Hope floated near the nurser's station, her golden hair catching the fluorescent light, her hands wriggling with a folded towel, every part of her betraying a nervous energy that she tried desperately to mask, and Liam had joined them shortly after. His usual confident swagger replaced by a tense, nearly defensive posture, glancing at Finn and Ivy with concern, formerly imagining the worst while trying to remain a pillar for the women he loved, and in that room, an exemplification of Forrester and Logan family dynamics collided with the sterile reality of a medical exigency, creating a palpable pressure that sounded to coo through every twinkle. Finn's phone buzzed, pulling him back to the present, a communication from the neurologist attesting the original MRI results, the excrescence's position, and the proposed coming way. Surgery would be necessary, the type of surgery uncertain until farther imaging, and the threat, though moderate, was insignificant, and as Finn read the details, he felt a shiver of dread run down his chine, the professional part of him assaying the data, calculating issues, chances, while the particular part of him imagined Ivy lying in a sanitarium bed, her soft breathing steady yet fragile, and he to purposely force himself to exhale and return to her side. Approaching her, he knelt beside the president she had been sitting in, the soft hum of fluorescent lights washing over them like a limelight in an empty theater, and Ivy's eyes, wide and glistering with unshed gashes, met his, seeking consolation, seeking stopgap, and he gave her the strongest smile he could muster, placing his hands over hers and saying, "Ivy, we're going to get through this step by step. I won't let anything be to you," and her grip tensed, a silent acknowledgement of the bond forming in the gauntlet of extremity, while outside the room, the sanitarium corridors came a stage for rumored exchanges, rushed consultations, and the occasional step echoing with urgency. Finn explained the surgical options, the timeline for pre-op tests, the need for neurosurgeons specialized in Ivy's type of excrescence, and the possible complications, his voice steady but gentle, avoiding medical slang where possible, each word chosen to assure rather than scarify, while Ivy absorbed the information with an admixture of unbelief and determination, her fritters tensing around his as though anchoring herself to the one constant in her suddenly chaotic world. And as Finn described the possible treatment plan, he also allowed himself the rare vulnerability of admitting that while drug was important, it couldn't prognosticate every outgrowth. And that was when Ivy leaned into him slightly, resting her head against his shoulder, a simple gesture that conveyed trust, fear, and affection all at formerly. The hours blurred as tests were run, blood drawn, reviews repeated, each effect feeding into the pressure that sounded to grow heavier with every end nanosecond, while back at Forrester Creations, the news of Ivy's collapse had formally spread, transferring a ripple through the halls of fashion, whispers of concern, enterprise, and worry mingling with the scent of fabric and incense as Brooke's phone buzzed constantly with dispatches about Ivy, her motherly instincts glaring as she considered whether to call Finn directly or stay for updates, and Katie, ever the realistic family, claimed on being by Ivy's side, arranging for flowers, warm robes, and constant updates to everyone who watched, while Ridge, typically composed and in control, set up himself pacing near the elevator, hands clasped behind his reverse, sometimes murmuring under his breath about how fragile life was, how snappily events entwined out of control, and how little he could do to impact medical issues despite all his power in business and family matters. The night settled in, the sanitarium lights bedimmed slightly, murk stretching across the walls of the waiting room, and Finn, still beside Ivy, noticed the way her eyelids fluttered with prostration, the pressure in her jaw easing as she let herself rest compactly, and he realized that while the path ahead was uncertain, moments like this, small, mortal, intimate, were what truly signified. the quiet adaptability forming the bedrock of their bond. Indeed, as the brewing presence of the excrescence and the unknown prognostic floated like a storm pall over them. Also suddenly Ivy's phone buzzed with a communication from Thomas, who had been tracking her position after hail of her collapse, offering words of support and concern, and though Ivy slightly responded, the intrusion of other lives into their particular extremity reminded Finn that this wasn't just a private struggle but bone that reverberated through their social and domestic networks, each person connected in a complex web of love, fidelity, and drama, while Finn continued explaining implicit side goods of surgery, recovery timelines, and the significance of internal and emotional strength in addition to physical mending, knowing that Ivy's determination and inner adaptability would be as pivotal as the skill of the surgeons operating on her. As the night strengthened, Ivy drifted in and out of knowledge, Finn refusing to leave her side, gently brushing slapdash beaches of hair from her forepart, brooding incentives, relating stories of their participated moments, and reminding her that the fight ahead, though intimidating, wasn't hers alone, and in these intimate hours, their relationship strengthened in ways that neither could have anticipated, a connection forged in the gauntlet of extremity, while in the sanitarium corridor, the supporting cast of musketeers, family, and co-workers grappled with their own fear and helplessness, swapping updates, calling specialists, arranging schedules, and chancing ways to contribute, their anxiety and love intertwining, creating a rich shade of interpersonal drama that amplified the stakes and pressure of Ivy's condition. The following morning brought news that needed immediate action. A neurosurgeon had reviewed Ivy's reviews and recommended surgery within the coming 48 hours, emphasizing both the urgency and the delicacy of the procedure, a disclosure that transferred Finn into a flurry of planning, coordinating with the surgeon, icing Ivy understood every detail, and most importantly, reaffirming that he'd be by her side every step of the way. Indeed, as he quietly plotted with his own fear of what could be, the ethical and emotional weight of minding for someone so near to him pressing down heavily, and Ivy, despite the terror, showed a flicker of determination, her resoluteness still blooming, the veritably substance of her character shining through as she agreed to do, trusting Finn with her life and her heart, while the sanitarium room itself sounded to hold its breath, a silent substantiation to the storm of mortal emotion, medical urgency, and the fragile beauty of adaptability and stopgap in the face of life-altering adversity, and indeed as she was wheeled in Toporop, Finn holding her hand until the veritably last moment, brooding solace and pledges, the scene was one of pressure, tender-heartedness, and the unmistakable drama that defined not only their particular trip but the veritably fabric of the bold and the beautiful, where love, fear, stopgap, and courage collide in a delicate cotillion that keeps observers on the edge of their seats, hearts in their throats, and minds contending with expectation for every twist, turn, and disclosure yet to come. As Ivy was fixed for surgery, the sanitarium room came a curve of exertion, nursers moving with precise effectiveness, checking vitals, preparing 4 lines, altering instruments, while Finn floated at her side, refusing to leave indeed for a moment, his hand no way leaving hers, the weight of his presence a steady anchor amidst the flurry of movement, yet outside. His mind contended through every possibility, every script, running through surgical procedures he'd studied, implicit complications, post-operative care, and recovery timelines, balancing clinical knowledge with the emotional stakes of loving someone whose life was now literally in his hands. And Ivy, her jitters tense like a violin string, clung to Finn with a despair that was both shocking and heartbreaking, brooding in a tremulous voice that she trusted him, that she knew ever they would survive this, indeed as fear hovered to catch her resoluteness, and Finn leaning down near, brushing hair from her pale face, rumored back, promising that she was strong, that she'd not face this alone, that every breath, every twinkle would be guided by his care, while outside the operating room, the pressure radiated like electricity through the sanitarium corridor, as Brooke and Katie paced with frantic energy, their voices sometimes rising in solicitude-laden exchanges, assuming about the surgery, agitating which neurosurgeon was the stylish, mooting the significance of Ivy's emotional state before anesthesia, and wondering whether Finn's presence would be enough to calm her, while Steffi and Hope alternated between pacing and sitting in tense silence, both visibly rattled yet determined to project a sense of calm for Liam, who stood hard, hands gripped, jaw tight, floundering to contain his own fear while trying to assure the women he loved, his mind a whirl of solicitude for Ivy, wrathfulness at the atrocity of circumstance, and helpless frustration at being limited to observation rather than action. And indeed Ridge, typically the stoic primogenitor, paced along the sterile hallway, checking his watch obsessively, murmuring about how life could change in a moment, how a single misstep could unravel everything, yet chancing himself oddly assured by the knowledge that Finn was there, a man he admired deeply, who now bore the binary mantle of healer and protection. Back outside, Ivy's palpitation contended as the anesthesiologist explained the process, the opiate lines and the need to stay calm, and Finn held her aspect, repeating her name, brooding stimulant, relating recollections of lighter moments, small palms, effects that made her laugh, anchoring her to a world outside the fear, and she, despite the terror, clung to those recollections, each one a lifeline, each participated laugh a bitsy rebellion against the darkness of query, while Finn's mind, though outwardly calm, scuffled with clashing feelings, medical sense prompting him to stay focused, emotional attachment hanging to overwhelm. The possibility of complications casting long murk across his generally steady address, the knowledge that this was Ivy, not just any case, making every decision, every consolation infinitely more charged. The doors to the operating room eventually opened, and as Ivy was gently wheeled toward them, her hand still in Finn's, the group outside changed silent ganders, some trying to project confidence, others openly pulsing with anxiety, while Finn walked beside the gurney until the last possible moment, brushing her impertinence with his thumb, brooding formerly more that everything would be all right, that he'd be staying when she woke, and that she was ent alone. And Ivy, gashes welling in her eyes, rumored back, her voice slightly audible, "I trust you." A simple expression that carried a macrocosm of emotion, and as the doors closed, the unforeseen silence left in their wake was nearly blaring, the sanitarium corridor now a vessel for the collaborative twinkle of a family united in solicitude, while outside, the surgical platoon prepared strictly, reviewing reviews, double-checking outfit, agitating approaches, each member apprehensive of the stakes, each movement precise and deliberate, the atmosphere tense yet controlled, the fate of a life balanced on skill, collaboration, and a touch of luck. Hours passed in an agonizing blur, the waiting room filled with hushed exchanges, silent prayers, occasional steps echoing ominously, while the characters alternated between frantic pacing, rumored enterprise, and quiet, supplicatory stopgap, their faces a study in pressure, love, and fear. And Finn, periodically exiting the OR to confer with the surgeons, streamlining the family in precisely measured words, each judgment chosen to assure, to inform, yet no way to overpromise, maintaining the fragile equilibrium between verity and stopgap, while Ivy, under anesthesia, drifted into the surreal, ignorant of the world outdoors, her life now in the hands of those she trusted, and Finn's unvarying presence a constant guard, a lifeline of both emotional and medical support, a pledge that she'd not face the unknown alone, anchored the narrative with the mortal drama that was as compelling as any Fashion Week reveal or commercial showdown. Meanwhile, outdoors, Brooke's phone buzzed constantly with updates from Paris, Thomas, and others, each communication a blend of concern, logistical collaboration, and subtle domestic politics, while Katie tried to organize the others, designating places, offering words of comfort, yet floundering with the pressure that came from helplessness, and Ridge, eventually settling into a president he generally reserved for business meetings, allowed himself the rare indulgence of solicitude, admitting the emotional risk that Ivy's condition assessed, while Liam paced, stopped, and started again, caught between fear and a sense of responsibility toward those around him, the interpersonal dynamics amplifying the pressure, layering the narrative with the classic bold and the beautiful interplay of love, fidelity, fear, and drama, each twinkle in the waiting room echoing the silent urgency of the operating room. And as twinkles stretched into hours, Finn returned again, this time with a conservative, measured smile, delivering news that, while complicated, suggested the surgery was pacing as planned, the excrescence located and incompletely removed, the surgeon cautiously auspicious but realistic about the road ahead, a delicate balance of stopgap and concern that reflected the duality of life and drug. And as the group absorbed the information, relief and anxiety mingled in equal measure. The emotional roller coaster of Cleaner Pieces drama in full force, each character scuffling with their own fears while trying to project calm for the others, the intensity of the participated experience binding them together in a fragile, temporary consanity, a memorial of how heads, whether medical, romantic, or commercial, could strip down pretense and expose the raw humanity beneath. And as Finn returned to Ivy's side in the recovery room, holding her hand as she drifted in and out of knowledge, he rumored again that she was strong, that she'd heal, that they would navigate the unknown together, and she, blinking groggily, managed a small, conditional smile, a flicker of stopgap.